Chapter 14. Jackson and Summer exited the Learjet. Parked and waiting at the airfield was a large black SUV with tinted windows. The driver hurried out of the car once he laid eyes on Jackson. The man reached for the bags, carried them, and placed them neatly into the trunk. Jackson opened the car door for Summer. "Have you ever been to North Dakota?" Jackson asked. "No. I heard of it in a movie. You know, the one where the sheriff is a woman." She glanced at him for reaction, then added, "Fargo." "I don't go to movies and I rarely watch television," Jackson said. "You've never gone to a movie?" Summer questioned in disbelief. "I didn't say that. I've gone, but it has been years." "Did you go in high school? Did you take a girl?" Summer inquired. Jackson's eyes stared blankly out. He had to remember the time when he was blind, and he and Summer sat through a movie, and she whispered in his ear. He said that he couldn't remember when he had a better time. The problem was that then he couldn't remember anything about his past. And now that he had his memory back, there was a gap as if Summer never existed. Jackson remained silent. He thought about how he had never been serious about any girl enough to ask her out. He hooked up with whoever was willing. Victoria was willing. Victoria was the high school queen, and he the high school king. It was expected that they would be together one day. But when she found out that he had spent the night with a new girl, she threw a fit and began dating his friend David. But that was just high school. She went back and dated Jackson again during his college years, but threatened never to see him again if he dropped out of Stanford. So he stayed until he graduated. There was one girl he would have taken to the prom, and one girl who he wanted to marry after college, but his memory failed him. Her face and name had faded away. In high school, whenever he went anywhere, it was as a group. When they weren't practicing on the field, he and his football buddies would hook up with girls on a Saturday night. He had a movie room in his house. There was no need to go to the movies. The only time Jackson could remember harboring feelings that wasn't all sexual was for that one girl that he couldn't completely place. It had been more than 5 years, but he should have remembered something about her. Maybe the concussion he received in his years playing college football brought on his loss of memory, or was it the bomb and plane crash? Crowding out his memories were the loss of 3 years and the feeling that something had happened that changed his life. He felt in his soul that he had been in love. He suffered from the lack of the woman's presence now, but didn't know who she was. "Mr. Van Hughes, is something troubling you?" Summer asked. All she wanted was for Jackson to recognize her before he committed himself to marrying Victoria. "No, Summer, it's just business I'm thinking about." But it wasn't just business for Jackson. He was trying to make sense of his life and find the feelings he had lost when he lost his memory. The black SUV pulled up to a small house that looked like a shack, which could have existed in any deserted part of the world, but it was in North Dakota. When Jackson stepped out of the car, his engineer Carter met him at the entrance of the house. "I was expecting something bigger and better. I didn't know this is what we would live in for 2 weeks, Jackson said, looking around at the makeshift house and then at Carter, who had been a childhood friend. "This is all that was available, Jack. The hotel is booked up years in advance. Some people are living outside in tents," Carter said, knowing that Jackson was disappointed and trying to placate him. Carter had dirty blonde hair and blue eyes, and appeared slightly shorter than Jackson's 6'3" frame. The engineer was dressed in a dark blue down coat with a hood over khakis and boots for walking in the mud. Summer realized that Carter's face showed his feelings. She could read his expressions of urgency and panic. She knew he was a good guy and looked out for Jackson's interest, and Jackson appeared to know that he could trust him as well. "I guess it's the best you can do, no problem, Carter. Let's get inside. It's too cold for Ms. Winter to stand out here." Jackson saw Summer shivering and hooked his arm around her shoulders. She wanted to hold him around his waist and look up and smile. Instead, she lowered her head and rushed into the cabin. Standing looking around, she saw a disappointed look on Jackson's face. "When you called me, you said you had great accommodations for me." "I didn't know that you were bringing a woman." Carter shrugged. "She's my assistant." "Where are you staying?" Jackson asked, looking around at the sparse accommodations, 2 cots and 3 chairs stacked near a card table. "I'm bunking with 6 other guys in a tent in town," Carter said, looking over at Summer. "Don't worry about me, Jack. I made sure you'd have plenty of blankets and quilts. I don't want to come back and find your frozen corpses in here." Smiling, he walked to the closet, pulling out camping gear. "Just zip up in here." Carter tried to give a smile, but Jackson wasn't amused. "Carter, it's not you I'm worried about, and I assure you that I won't be a frozen corpse. I have survival skills." He walked around the room, opening the stove and throwing in a log. Summer gazed around the room and walked to the cabinet. "We might freeze, but we won't starve to death." The cabinet was stocked with an array of canned goods. "I will be just fine. Don't worry about me. I have to complete a report you requested after I look for the bedroom." Carter's eyes fell to the floor. "What?" Jackson asked, waiting for more bad news. "There are no bedrooms. It's just this one large room," Carter said. "That's the restroom," he said, looking at Summer. "Great. Now what am I going to tell Victoria?" he asked angrily, throwing his phone on the table. "I have to sleep in the same room with my assistant, who happens to be a gorgeous woman." Jackson spoke without thinking. Summer's glance locked on his. He realized that he should not have blurted out his feeling in front of Carter. He thought Summer was the hottest woman he had laid eyes on, and he was surprised at his words because he wasn't allowing himself the luxury of frivolous thoughts. "Mr. Van Hughes." "Please call me Jackson. My father is Mr. Van Hughes, and since we're going to be stuck in here together for 2 weeks, we may as well get used to addressing each other by our first names." He gazed at Carter. "I hope we at least have a separate toilet and shower." Carter walked to the makeshift door of plywood with a handle and pointed proudly. "I had my men get on it, and they finished it in a matter of minutes when I said the big boss was coming. They have been working overtime, trying to make everything convenient for you and Mrs. Winter." "It's Ms. Winter, Carter." "Oh. I hope this won't be your last visit," Carter said, meeting Summer's glance. Jackson stared at Carter. Carter had known Jackson a long time and didn't expect such an unexpected look of displeasure on his face. "Ms. Winter is a devoted employee, and she's not here looking for a husband. She is with me on business, and I'm sure that if she was looking for someone, it wouldn't be with you." He stood, looking at Carter. Carter got the message. Maybe Jackson hadn't changed. Perhaps he was that same football jock from high school that had the pick of the litter of the most desirable girls, Carter thought. All Jackson's friends, including Carter, thought he had hit a touchdown when he became engaged to Victoria. She came from a wealthy family, and she was the prettiest blonde in their graduation class who had never slept with Jackson. Carter knew that when Jackson became engaged to Victoria, Jackson didn't know about her notorious reputation for giving blowjobs to his teammates. However, no one would risk telling him about her, especially if they wanted to keep their position at Van Hughes Oil and Engineering. Jackson gave his entire football circle of friends jobs at his company. After all, they had had a hand in making him the most sought-after quarterback in the country, and this had helped further his playboy reputation. "We have work to do, Carter. I will see you in the field in an hour." Carter left the tent. Summer looked at Jackson in silence. "If we're going to work together, then you will have to stop planning my life," Summer said. "I can tell Carter if I'm not interested. I don't need you to do that." She threw her purse on the cot. I'm going to take a shower. Please leave the papers on the table that you want me to work on. Facing the plywood door, Jackson walked to the stove and threw another piece of wood in it, wondering why he would react that way toward Carter. He was a changed man. He was no longer a boy. He remembered something his grandfather had once said: "When I was a boy, I behaved as a boy, but when I became a man, I put away boyish things." Man or not, Jackson didn't want to share summer with anyone. He realized that was why he was throwing himself into his work so seriously, toiling day and night. Before they left for North Dakota, the only time he had appeared to rest or enjoy himself was in his office. It was something about the office. No, it wasn't the office. It was Summer who made his day worth living. Now, with her standing right in front of him, he knew that he didn't want to lose her. He added more wood to the stove, trying to make it warm and comfortable for Summer. Then he left while she was in the makeshift restroom. When she came out from the small closet of a bathroom, she expected to see Jackson. But he didn't return until late. He staggered in, holding on to Carter for help getting him through the doorway. Summer sat up on the cot, grabbing for her robe. "Put him down over there." "I'll take care of him, Carter," she said. Carter glanced at her. "You know this is not part of your job." "Yes, I know, but I have done this before." Summer looked over at Carter. Carter placed Jackson on the other cot in the corner of the shack. "What would make him drink like this?" Summer queried. "I've known Jackson since we were football heroes in college. He drank hard and played hard. He always talked about the girl that got away. He never got over her, and it was around the time his mother died." Carter sat at the table after covering Jackson up with a heavy blanket. "I have coffee. Do you want some?" Summer asked, hoping Carter would continue talking. "Yeah, I'll take a cup. I need something to sober me up." Summer poured him a cup and he sipped it. When Jack returned from Texas, he was a changed man. He stopped behaving like a spoiled child, and he stopped drinking. Something is making him drink more now than ever, though. Maybe it's his engagement to Victoria. He never wanted to marry her. He wanted to marry a girl he met in high school. That's all he talked about. How he was going to find her one day and ask her to marry him even if she was married, because he knew that they loved each other and that nothing would keep them apart. Carter glanced across the table, meeting Summer's eyes. He continued. He never found her. He tried, but with his football career and college and pressure from his father and Victoria, well, that left little time for anything else. When he came home, it was as if all the life had drained out of him. He was like that movie, The Walking Dead, just moving aimlessly but not enjoying anything. Did he say anything about the girl? He couldn't remember anything, and it frustrated him. He could always drink and that never bothered him, but it's affecting him now, Carter said, looking into Summer's face and enjoying the last drop of coffee. He stood. "I have to leave. We have to be out in the field tomorrow morning. Have him ready and sober, please." "I'll try," Summer assured Carter. After closing the door, she turned and looked at Jackson sleeping. She walked over and laid another blanket over him. When she pulled his blanket to his chest, he caught her hand and said, "Summer, don't leave me." These were the same words he whispered before in his sleep. When he was asleep, he remembered the girl's name, but when he was awake, he couldn't remember anything. Summer climbed into her cot near his bed and slept, knowing that her Adam was beside her. The clock rang loud, and when Jackson opened his eyes, Summer had coffee with poached eggs and corned beef hash waiting for him. "This is all I could find for breakfast," Summer said, handing him a cup of coffee. "I didn't bring you down here to cook, but you don't know how much I appreciate the coffee and breakfast," he said, sitting up and stretching. "Tonight, dinner is on me. I hear they have a diner that's all the rage. It's booked up until May. But it just so happens I own the town and the diner. We have the best table in the house. The one directly under the moose's head on the wall, he said, shifting his glance to her. Summer raised an eyebrow. Well, Jackson, how can a girl turn down an invitation like that? How many girls can say they dined under a moose? I hope it's not on the menu. Standing up, he suddenly looked at himself and asked, Why am I still in my clothes from yesterday? Because you came home. You came back drunk and Carter laid you just as you are in your cot. I know I'm your personal assistant, but you said nothing about undressing you and putting you to bed. Only if you come to bed with me, he said. Summer turned her back to Jackson. Then, turning around, she said, Then you lied when you said that you had only one interest. I'm sorry, Summer. I didn't mean to insult you. He walked and placed his arm around her, and she kept her back to him. He turned her around, and she had tears welling in her eyes. I didn't mean what I said. I would never do anything to compromise you or my business relationship with you. On the contrary, Summer was crying because she wanted it to be true. She wanted him so much that it made her body weak, and she knew that regardless of a fiancé, if she didn't get out of that environment with him, she would find herself in his bed with a man who was about to be married. She wanted her Adam, but not this way. When are we leaving, Jackson? We've just arrived here. Jackson's gaze fell on Summer. He saw in her eyes how uncomfortable she had become. He didn't want her to leave his company. But I can get everything completed in 2 days. Will you have lunch with me today and dinner tonight? Please. He folded his hands together. If I want to eat something besides canned meat, I guess we have a date. Will you forgive me? I will not let this happen again. Summer wanted it to happen again and again. After leaving the diner, a car brought them back to their tent. When they stepped inside, Jackson said, It's cold in here. I'll light a fire. Shaking, they glanced around and realized that they had used all of the wood. It's so cold and it's too late to get someone to bring some over, Jackson said, looking around trying to figure out how they could stay warm. He grabbed sleeping bags that were stowed under his cot and looked at the thermometer. It's below freezing in here. It's still cold, she said, shivering and trying to still her chattering teeth. I'll have to sleep with you. If you have a problem with that, then tell me now and I won't do it, Jackson said. I'm too cold to care about anything, Summer admitted. Jackson brought the remaining blankets and laid them on Summer, and then he crawled into the sleeping bag beside her. Are you feeling better? He asked. I don't know. I'm still so cold, Summer said. Jackson took Summer and put his arms under her and brought her to him. She glanced at him. He held her in his arms and she closed her eyes, enjoying the warmth of his body and the feelings she longed for. She felt sexual heat ease through her body. He felt sexual desire consume him. They were embracing each other, feeling desires they couldn't discuss. They woke the next morning with Summer lying in his arms. Jackson glanced at her and she was still asleep. He remembered the feeling he had when he woke with the girl of his dreams, sleeping in his bed. It was that same feeling he had that made him declare that he could never be separated from her again. It was then that he knew he had found the perfect girl for him. When Summer woke, her body lurched in surprise. We shouldn't be together like this, she said, embarrassed. Just a few more moments. I want to remember you lying in my arms, Jackson admitted. A man that's engaged and marrying in a few weeks should not be talking like this. I have embarrassed you and overstepped my bounds, and I apologize once more. But I won't apologize for my feelings. Summer wiggled out of the blanket and stood. She reached for a quilt and sat on a cot. We are both to blame for this. No one is to blame because nothing happened, he said, reaching for his smartphone. We need some wood so we won't repeat what happened last night. They looked at each other with disappointed glances. Summer made coffee for the two of them, and then retreated into the shower. The smell of the coffee was dominated by strawberries. Jackson searched his senses, but he couldn't piece together why he adored that smell. She wrapped a towel about her head and exited the makeshift shower wearing a heavy bathrobe. Her face was flawless without makeup. It had a youthful glow, like a teenager. She turned to see Jackson staring in her direction. "It's your turn now." "What?" "Oh me. Yes?" Jackson said, absent-minded. Summer pointed to the door. She turned her head and went to the section she had cornered off to set boundaries between the two for privacy. She reached for 2 blankets and laid them across a string separating their cots. After Summer dressed, she waited for Jackson. He walked to his cot with his dark blonde hair wet and in disarray. He set her heart palpitating. Oh, how handsome he appeared at that moment with a large towel around his waist and the top of his body shirtless. She quickly reached for a flannel shirt and helped him into it. Standing in front of him buttoning his sleeves, he gazed down on her and laughed. "What are you doing?" "Now it's time for me to say I'm sorry." "I hope you're not thinking what I think you're thinking," said Summer, moving away from him. "I wouldn't dare," he said with a raised eyebrow and a smile. "I'm used to doing this. I took care of a blind man once." "Oh," Jackson murmured, hoping she had done this on his behalf. "I was hoping you were going beyond your personal assistant duties." She moved away, turning her head, and the gap that had existed before remained intact. There was a knock on the door, and 2 men brought in a stack of wood for the stove. Shortly afterward, a car arrived and took them to the oil site.